I was diagnosed with cancer at the end of February. One day you're okay, and the next you're not, you're dying.
Just heard somebody on the radio talking about someone described Sam, so then we got him diagnosed privately when he was just older than 2. It was absolutely devastating. I couldn't even get my head around it.
The hardest part for me about struggling with my mental health was finding the right resources. A Lust for Life have loads of stories on their website which you can read about other people's experiences. It's really comforting to know other people are going through the same things as you.
We need to have more funding to get more work done for the traveller community, not only in COVID, not only today and tomorrow, but all the time.
Dublin Simon community for me was like a bridge back to normal living, you know. They really helped me, you know, by supporting me and showed me how to kind of live and gain the life skills that I need to learn, you know, to become a member of society, I suppose, again.
They are children, they just want to tell you more about themselves. I've laughed with them, I've cried with them. Nobody's judging them here, we're just listening.
We're seeing the trauma that is domestic abuse, we're seeing the trauma that is the lockdown, but we're also seeing the trauma that is entrapment with the aggressor in those situations, and it makes for a very dangerous cocktail. Right through this pandemic, we remain able and here to support any victims of domestic abuse. And that goes a long way in, I hope, providing some comfort to women in terms of the uncertainty they face over the weeks and months ahead.
Really, Meals on Wheels has kept me alive for the last few months.
Oh, I really miss it, and I am in contact with a lot of the other clientele, and they all miss it. And the big question is, when are we going to open again?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Gaffney, and as chairperson of the Community Foundation of Ireland, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here this morning in this new format. We're delighted to be able to bring you this series of Philanthropy Masterclasses virtually, and we hope you'll enjoy them and take away some pointers from the fantastic lineup of speakers that we have. I know many of you here joining us this morning know us well and work with us with the Community Foundation for Ireland, and we hope that the inputs throughout the series are useful to you. All of us have our own causes that we want to support. However, it's useful for us all to step back from time to time and reflect on whether our donations or our activities are actually making a difference. And there are many lessons that can be learned from other donors and experts in the philanthropy space. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time or new to us, we hope this masterclass series gives you some inspiration and guidance on how to start or to inform your charitable giving. The Community Foundation for Ireland provides space, and we have resources for people to learn about effective and strategic giving, and guides new and long-term donors on how they can make a real difference, not just giving as a reaction. As you will hear from the speakers today, philanthropy is not just about giving to charity, but can be a powerful tool for social change, for making real change happen. So today's session will last no later than 12:30. And we'll hear from 2 guest speakers along with the Community Foundation for Ireland's new CEO, Denise Charlton. And what I'll do now is I'll introduce all 3 speakers before I hand you over to them. Okay. So firstly, Phil Buchanan. Phil is joining us from Massachusetts, where he's up very early in the morning. And Phil is president of the Centre for Effective Philanthropy. He's a passionate advocate for the importance of philanthropy and the non-profit sector. And the Centre is deeply committed to the cause of helping foundations and individual donors to maximise their impact. Phil was hired in 2001 as the organisation's first chief executive, and he has led the growth of the CEP into be the leading provider of data and insight on philanthropic effectiveness. CEP has been widely credited with bringing the voices of all stakeholders to funders, and with contributing to an increased emphasis on the key elements of effectiveness. Phil is also the author of the book, Giving Done Right, Effective Philanthropy and Making Every Dollar Count. Our second speaker is our own Stephen Vernon. Stephen is the Community Foundation for Ireland's 2020 Philanthropist of the Year winner for his outstanding contributions over many, many years, decades, I suspect, to philanthropy. Stephen is the founder of businesses Green Properties and Green REIT, so he's a very rare example of an entrepreneur who's done it hugely successfully, at least twice, as far as I know. And he's used his success in the business world to give generously to causes that are close to his heart. Finally, you'll hear from our new CEO, Denise Charlton. Denise has spent decades being a community rights, equality and social justice campaigner. She was appointed our CEO in July 2020. Her commitment to equality has seen Denise successfully take leadership roles and campaigns on marriage equality, children's rights, immigration reform, to name but a few of many. She was previously the CEO of both the Immigrant Council of Ireland and Women's Aid, and Denise has a deep understanding of the sector and the positive impact that strategic giving can have on individual families and entire communities. And Denise, as I said, for decades, she's been very, very committed to this cause and to philanthropy, and we're really delighted to have her as our new CEO. So with that, I will pass you over to our first speaker, Phil Buchanan. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning. I'm going to just share my screen here. I'm so pleased to be with everyone this morning, and grateful to Denise and Hazel for all their work to put this together. Thanks to Michael for kicking us off. And I want to talk today about what I see as sort of truths revealed by the crisis or crises that we find ourselves in. Disclaimer right off the top. I'm originally Canadian, but I've been in the United States since I was 6 months old. And although the Center for Effective Philanthropy works with foundations all around the world, I know this country's philanthropic and nonprofit sector best. I don't assume that everything applies equally elsewhere, but I'm hopeful that some of my observations will be applicable. And you can tell me in the Q&A portion what I may have missed about the context being different, as it surely is. I was obviously invited originally to discuss my book, Giving Done Right, and I do think the lessons in it apply. But fundamentally, in the book, I argue that giving is a uniquely challenging discipline. I was on the Philanthropy Ireland website, and there's a great quote there from Aristotle. To give away money is an easy matter and in any man's power, but decide to whom to give it and how large and when and for what purpose and how is neither in every man's power nor an easy matter. And I thought about that quote and how similar it is to what Andrew Carnegie said over a century ago. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said he needed to shift from the task of accumulating wealth to the far more difficult job of distributing it wisely. Go roughly 100 years further to Warren Buffett's announcement that he was giving billions to the Gates Foundation, and in explaining why he was doing that rather than trying to set up his own philanthropic entity, he talked about how uniquely difficult philanthropy is. And he said, in business, you look for the easy things to do, and it's a much simpler game than philanthropy. After all, philanthropy tends to be addressing the very challenges that have defied market or government solutions. And yet, routinely, we hear people underestimate the complexity and the difficulty, and how it seems every day you can read another article about the new philanthropist who's applying the secrets of their business approach to the world of giving. And then 10 years later, they have learned the hard way that much of what made them successful in business may not translate quite so easily to the world of philanthropy. And the unique difficulty of giving is only compounded by this moment of crisis. So I don't really need to tell you that that this moment is truly unprecedented between a global pandemic, an economic meltdown here in the United States, a long overdue reckoning on racism and structural racism. These are unprecedented times for sure, but they're also much harder times for some than for others. And in the US, it's on stark display the way the economy coming to a halt has had an outsized impact on immigrant populations, on Latinx people, on African Americans, on folks working in frontline jobs, the overwhelmingly female population that works in the hospitality industry. Inequality has been deepened in ways that could last generations. And I doubt it's so different in Ireland. Folks who were on the edge before and couldn't make rent payments now are on the verge of eviction. Those who do still have jobs, perhaps made it into the middle class from wherever they began, have been, in many cases, furloughed or laid off, and or need to step in to take care of loved ones who are experiencing economic hardship. So if ever there was a need for those who can give, and to give wisely, and to give effectively, it is surely now. So what's a donor to do then? Well, as I've already indicated, I don't think giving is like investing. And I don't think nonprofits are like business. I think there are real distinctions. And in the book, I try to root the reader in the realities of the vast and diverse set of nonprofits that exist. And this felt important to me given the pervasive negative stereotypes, at least here in this country, and I don't know whether how common this is in Ireland, about nonprofits and their staff. I'm continually amazed by the things I hear. Nonprofit staff are overpaid. Nonprofits are bloated. Nonprofits spend too much on overhead. Nonprofit staff couldn't make it in the real world. Nonprofits don't care about measuring effectiveness. And then my favorite, I get this call from people I went to business school with sometimes. Hey, Phil, I've worked in business for the past couple of decades. I'm wildly successful, And now I'm looking to slow down, give back, have work-life balance. So I thought I'd explore nonprofit work because it's more relaxed. I honestly, again, don't know how common this is in Ireland, but it drives me mad. Now, are any of these statements true in isolated cases? Of course, but as generalities about nonprofits and their staff, each one is flat out wrong. And the widespread belief in these myths actually hinders nonprofits and effective giving in all kinds of ways. So I try in the book to tell the story of regular nonprofit staff doing the heroic work that they do every day. So I write, for example, about a woman called Kathy Moore who runs Epiphany Community Health Outreach Services, or ECHOS, in Houston, Texas, here in the US. It was formed in 1999 to meet the needs of what she calls poverty-stricken, vulnerable families in local neighborhoods. Here's one of her staff members. So what do? They provide services from children's immunizations to blood pressure and glucose screenings, child checkups, vision and dental care. They help with basic needs, providing food from the food pantry, English classes, computer literacy trainings, a domestic violence support group. They have a budget of $500,000 US, 9 staff, and they struggle to meet the needs of all of their prospective clients. Kathy, the executive director, does a little bit of everything in her role. She said, it's very hard when you're a very small organization and wearing every hat. It makes it hard to be good at fundraising. We have had no problems finding clients. Donors, not so much. And that was before COVID. I called her on March 17, when most of us who work in offices had decided to work remotely. We're going to work because we think of ourselves as first responders, she told me. I'm tired and all the staff is tired, but we won't shut down unless we really have to. She told me ECHOS was struggling to find volunteers to replace the retired people who they relied on but who were understandably staying home. Their staff were doing even more as a result. Over the weeks and months, Kathy and I have called and texted, and she shared with me photos of lines of cars coming for food that were longer than she could have imagined, and too long for the supplies of food that Echos has. I tell you about Kathy and Echos and the staff there, not because they're so unusual. Nonprofit heroes like them are in every community, every neighborhood, all over the world. They're extraordinary, but what's extraordinary is the fact that, again, in every community, such people exist. I think effective philanthropy starts with a deep understanding of the worth of nonprofits and a rejection of the stereotypes I described. I believe that running a nonprofit takes everything it takes to run an equivalent sized business and a bunch more. And yet we hear this all the time, that nonprofits should operate more like business. I never understood what that means. Google, Volkswagen, the corner dry cleaner, Procter & Gamble, Amazon, Patagonia. I went to business school. I worked in strategy consulting in the corporate world. I can tell you there are good businesses and terrible ones, just as there are good government agencies and terrible ones, and good nonprofits and not so good ones. So donors are then told to act like investors, maybe venture capitalists, and hold nonprofits to account as if they were staffed by people who chose to work there in order to settle in for a long nap. And it's the funder's job to roust them from their sleep, kick them in the butt, and get them moving. So I want to suggest that this isn't a helpful way to think about nonprofits or about philanthropy. And I want to offer 5 truths that I think this crisis has sort of more fully revealed, that I think can hopefully help guide you as you think about how you want to respond to this moment. So the first, which I've already basically given away, is that business and investment metaphors are not helpful, nor is the related idea that big is always better. Much emphasis has been placed on the idea of scale and big bets. And while that's the right approach in some cases, when something is shown to be effective and has broad applicability, absolutely see if you can scale it up across geographic contexts. It's often true that locally rooted nonprofits like Echos, with deep connections to the communities and neighborhoods they serve, are best positioned to be effective. Small does not mean inefficient, ineffective, or duplicative. Size is not a proxy for effectiveness. Yet it's very common to hear this equation made by critics of nonprofits and philanthropy. So it's important to remember that while a company's success is defined by its profit and growth relative to its competitors, nonprofit success is not so easily measured. And nonprofits don't usually solve anything entirely by themselves. They're part of a complicated ecosystem of organizations addressing related issues. So while in the for-profit world, we think about zero sum, what is Uber's market share relative to Lyft's, the giving and nonprofit world is all about should be all about collaborative dynamics. How does a homeless shelter work in relation to a drug treatment center to achieve a shared goal of better outcomes for homeless people suffering from addiction? Strategies need to be shared rather than unique and distinct as they would be in business. And perhaps this is why people like Mario Marino, who helped start the so-called venture philanthropy movement, now concede, as he did bravely in an interview for the book, that it's not a very good analogy. These decisions have a degree of social complexity that is far greater, he told me. Second truth, listening to those you seek to help and acting on the basis of what you hear is crucial, especially now in a time of rapid change and crisis. So many donors, individual and institutional, make the mistake of thinking they know best what others need. Don't do what Bill Gates did in a story I describe in the book and think you know what's best for others without carefully testing it out. And I got plenty of praise for some elements of what the Gates Foundation has done, but this wasn't a great initiative, what I'm about to describe. He launched in 2016 a plan to donate 100,000 hens in developing countries to combat extreme poverty. He had written a blog post, or somebody wrote it, and it had his byline on it, about the wisdom of raising chickens as a way out of poverty. There it is. It's pretty clear to me that just about anyone who's living in extreme poverty is better off if they have chickens, he wrote. In fact, if I were in their shoes, that's what I would do. I would raise chickens. Well, the wisdom of this effort may have been clear to Gates. It wasn't necessarily clear to everyone else. In fact, the Bolivian government rejected the help, calling it offensive. And one headline read, "Cluck you, Bolivia rejects Bill Gates's donation of hens." The point is this: it doesn't really matter if Gates was right. If the people he intended to help, or those who stood between the donation and the people he intended to help, didn't agree, or if they're insulted by the suggestion. Sound strategy is crucial in philanthropy, but again, it must be shared and informed by the people you seek to help. Community foundations can play a crucial role, Community Foundation of Ireland, as a bridge between donors and nonprofits and those they serve. We know from our research that grantees want their donors, individuals and institutions alike, to deepen their understanding of their organizations, of the issues they're working to address, of the communities they seek to help. And this requires a deep humility on the part of donors and, as I said, listening. If you listen right now, unfortunately, you will learn, as many of you know, that nonprofits are on the financial precipice, many of them, and that what is most needed is for donors with the means to step up and give generously and without restrictions to key organizations. We did a survey of US nonprofits in May, and we saw that 81% had to cut programs, 80% had already had to draw from financial reserves, 62% had reduced staff hours, wages, or benefits. 49% had already laid off folks or were planning to. And then the top challenges that these nonprofit profits reported among their community constituents were financial instability, food insecurity, and mental health challenges, the kind of things that we saw in a moving video that opened this session. Communities are in crisis, and so are the vital organizations that support them. And there's a real risk that the nonprofit sector, as we know it, will not survive after this crisis is over. That crucial organizations working on key issues and with vulnerable populations that they have built trust with over many years will not be there anymore. I hope this headline is not accurate. What we see nonprofit leaders facing now is something that no business leader ever has to grapple with. Decreasing revenue coupled with increased demand. So those go hand in hand in the business world, not always in the nonprofit sector, which creates a unique level of difficulty. We see that direct service organizations are especially hard hit, and not showing it in this chart here, but we saw that those serving historically disadvantaged groups were having a particularly difficult time. So what do nonprofits need from donors in this moment? Well, you won't be surprised that they need more funding, unrestricted funding. So now is not the time to say, use my money for this, but not for that, because nonprofits need to be nimble and flexible in adapting to the crisis. If you trust them, if you believe in their mission and their goals, give them flexible funding. And if you trust them, don't get hung up on often meaningless measures like overhead rate, having to do with how the budget is allocated and whether they're, spending money, sort of the desire that donors have sometimes to say, well, I want to support the food pantry, but I only want to support the food, not the staff that coordinate the volunteers or the rent that pays for the space. This makes no sense. All are necessary for the organization to do its work. Another thing that is desperately needed by nonprofits right now is just as much transparency and clarity as possible on the part of donors about what they can do in the future. And I know that's hard, but it's really important to nonprofits. I don't know how much you all have been paying attention to some of the critiques of the last few years of philanthropy and sort of elite philanthropy in particular. But I know in the U.S. and certainly in the U.K., in England in particular, I know that there's been a lot of attention paid to this, and I don't know what the debate has been like in Ireland exactly. But even as we can acknowledge the many ways in which philanthropy and nonprofits can be better, I think we have to reject the critiques of philanthropy that rest on some idealized notion of the public sector. So one prominent example of this is Anand Giridhara's book, Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, which makes some good points about exactly the kind of things I talked about, the sort of idealization of business as the answer to everything. But then I think kind of goes too far in reputations, and elite giving cannot be separated from self-protection. And some of those critiques echo the critiques of Lindsay McGooey, who wrote, and I think she's at Sussex. She wrote University of Sussex. She wrote a book called No Such Thing as a Free Gift, which made similar arguments. And again, some of these critiques have surely been true in specific instances, but as broad generalizations about philanthropic donors, they're inaccurate and unhelpful. Critics like Giridhara and Stanford University's Rob Reich put all their faith in an idealized vision of what the government perhaps could, and some might say should be, but never has been. They fail to recognize that it is nonprofits supported by philanthropy that often are fighting for the rights of people to be respected and treated fairly by the government. You can look at examples like the fight in Ireland for rights for LGBTQ people and for marriage equality, which was supported, of course, by Atlantic Philanthropies and other donors. This effort took philanthropy. It was about effective, strategic, collaborative philanthropy and the recognition that, again, nobody's going to accomplish something alone. But it wasn't just about looking to the government, to on its own decide to change things. Pressure obviously needed to be applied. Final point I would make, and I already alluded to this, but I just want to emphasize it, is that to respond effectively to the COVID crisis and the related economic crisis, you need to be informed by the reality of deep inequities and to actively and assertively counter those realities. This crisis is not impacting every community in the same way. And I don't seek to minimize anyone's trauma. I lost my uncle to COVID in April. But I can also recognize that, at least here in this country, where I am, there are certain communities that have been impacted massively, disproportionately. And so if I want to give effectively, I need to pay attention to where I'm giving and what the data tells me about those impacts. Inequality is real and it's deepened, and I know that's true in Ireland as well as here. And so we need to understand the ways in which systemic inequities create disparate outcomes for people based simply on where they were born or the color of their skin. And effective giving, I believe, can counter this dynamic. So these are my 5 points. And I would say that of course we need business. Of course we need government, and they play distinct roles, and each has their limits. But we also need giving and the nonprofits that giving supports. Each sector actually needs the other to be its best. Each is sometimes in dynamic tension with each other. Sometimes they collaborate. And we need effective giving right now in a way we never have at least in my lifetime. So I thank you for being a donor, being committed enough to work with the Community Foundation of Ireland and to be here this morning. And I hope that you'll do everything you can to make a difference, because I don't think any of us are going to look back at this time and wish we had done less. Thank you.
Okay, I've unmuted, so I presume people can hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, that was a great presentation. It's given me some food for thought, because in some ways, not intentionally, but the reality is I'm a little bit of the opposite of what is being suggested there as a way to go, in the sense that I don't generally give to non-profits. And if I did, it's unlikely to be on an unrestricted basis, but maybe I need to rethink that. So I'll begin with a quote that some of you may have heard, which I really like, and I think sums up maybe a way people in the later stage of their life would like to think about things. So this was a quote from George Bernard Shaw, who lived a long life and completed his last play the week before his 94th birthday. And he said, "I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch, which I've got to hold for the moment. And I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." I think, in a way, for me, philanthropy is something that's more associated with this final quarter of my life, probably. Partly because I now have time to think about this, and also partly because I have the money to take it more seriously. So really, this is what got me started on philanthropy, as opposed to random giving. I mean, everybody gets involved in random giving almost from their childhood. But I think philanthropy is a slightly different issue, because it's more thought through and more focused. And so that's what really kind of got me started. And there are two strands to the way I look at it. One is things that interest me, and one is help for people that are less fortunate. So the things that interest me are basically in Ireland and done through what I've called the John Pollard Foundation, which was a lump of loot that I managed to earn. And it's a company, an investment company, which I have not made into a charity, because I don't want the restrictions that would bring. And it's focused on medical research, education, music, and the arts. And it has a board, and we make investments. So the plan is to grow it through investing, and with the intention of then being able to support its philanthropic aims for the next 10 to 20 years. So those are the three main themes of the John Pollard Foundation. And then in terms of the less fortunate, that's really more of a family thing. There is an official charity in the UK, and my wife and my son are more involved than I am, although I am quite involved in this, and it's called the Mona Tray Foundation. And that essentially works in Nepal. And we back a man called Uttam Sanjel and the Samata Foundation. He runs bamboo schools made entirely of bamboo. He's educating about 60,000 children for $1 a month in these schools. It's quite an extraordinary thing that children are well taught. I've sat in the classrooms and listened to the standard of education. And it's an interesting journey, because the plan was to try to put school nurses into some of these schools. My wife was a nurse, and this is what came up with it. We listened to Uttam, who said it was impossible. Some of these schools have children living under the floorboards, under the bamboo floorboards. So instead, we built a clinic that would then allow us to have a nursing school. And the nursing school was scheduled to open in September, and we'll produce about 120 nurses a year from the children in the schools. And the plan is to then arm them with PCs and send them back into the schools, and maybe end up with school nurses, but it would be about a 15-year project to get to that point. So what do I get from this? Well, I mean, I get a lot from it. It's part of my life now, because my business commitments are slightly less than they used to be, although I'm not retired. So there's a sense of community belonging, particularly here in Ireland. And it's great fun. I've enjoyed really every aspect of it, apart from Nepalese food. And anybody who's lived on Dal Bat for a week will probably know what I'm talking about. So some lessons, I suppose, that I've picked up along the way. One is involvement of family and friends. And the people that are on the board of my John Pollard Foundation are essentially friends. But they're working partly pro bono. They're actually paid, but not a realistic amount. And the investments that we're making in the John Pollard Foundation are mainly in things that have some kind of hopeful purpose. For example, pharma. We've invested in a couple of pharma things. One has come from Imperial College in London, one's come from UCD. I think it's important to have a plan or a theme, and that's really what I've been outlining, is where I focus my activity. And then I think it helps if you have chosen things of interest, because on a human level, it keeps you more motivated. And I think that one of the things I've heard from those to whom we're supporting is that it's really helpful if you can keep the involvement rather than, one-off gifts. And I like to be involved in the things that I'm giving to. So, I mean, the first of the more substantial ones I've done was to donate an MRI suite to the National Maternity Hospital. But as a result of that, I then joined the board and the executive board, and now chair the relocation committee for hopefully the new hospital that's being planned. And it's the same with the Academy of Music. I'm quite involved there, not just as a philanthropist. I've been involved in helping them to raise the money for a new conservatoire of music, which is currently under construction, and that's been a real success. At Trinity, we have a poetry prize there, and support the Behind the Headlines series of discussions of matters of topical interest, which is going great, and I'm involved in other ways with Trinity. And I suppose the other highlight was being the opening of this nursing school, although because of the COVID thing, I haven't been able to go out there and actually see it as it starts back. So what advice would I give to anybody thinking about focusing their mind on philanthropy in the way I've described? I would say, stand back and analyze it in quite a logical kind of way, and choose things that you want to have an involvement with in some way or other. Analyze what you hope to achieve. So I think sort of intellectually analyzing the problem, whether it's just abject poverty, whether it's children that need education in Nepal, whether it's music and the arts, you've still got to analyze what is the issue and how you can help. You've got to be realistic. So I try and avoid, for example, building projects, because I have a certain amount of money to give away, but I'm not in the sort of super league, so I can't be building buildings for universities or whatever. I suppose you've got to define your own commitment and time that you can give to it, and understand the scale at which you can be involved. So be involved and carry the torch. That would be my concluding remark.
Welcome everybody, and thanks to Mike, Stephen and Phil. It's been just fascinating listening to you both, Stephen and Phil, and I just think that the passion commitment to philanthropy really comes across, and I'm sure that all our audience will have really gained some nuggets from both of the presentations. So thanks to both. And Phil, well, to both of you actually, Mike acknowledged from the outset for CFI how important it was, and how, I suppose, appreciative we are of you sharing your insights and your expertise. And I think what's clear from the presentations, we have a very important audience here, but it is such a crucial time for philanthropy. So really appreciate, Phil, you surfacing that in particular. The way you've worked with donors and the leadership that you've shown in the States, and encouraging that investment for impact, that reputation precedes you. And again, just thanks for sharing some of those nuggets with us. I suppose there's a couple of takeaways for me, and they have resonance for the Community Foundation for Ireland. I suppose the first is the way the centre uses data, insight and evidence. You know, it's best in the class, and it's something that we would really concur with as well. We would always try and have evidence and insights for our donors and in our own grant making. I really like the way you also surface, though, that needs to be balanced with putting the recipient and the beneficiaries to the core of any grant giving. And that would be something at Community Foundation for Ireland that we would really position ourselves to do, that connectivity with those that are most vulnerable and need our support. So again, really appreciative of that. You know, reading the book and listening to you, the mantra of every dollar counts, and different currencies aside, and that is something that's really important. And it's really important for us, again, at the Community Foundation for Ireland. It's particularly important in a country where philanthropy is very underdeveloped. It isn't necessarily recognised for what it does and the impact it has. And so, you know, our mantra of every dollar counts, working with our donors and with our grantees, I think is something that will really help us progress that underdeveloped context. So just thanks a million for that. It's always great to hear Philanthropists of the Year speak, and Stephen, as always, you never let us down. It's really fantastic to hear about, I suppose, what brought you to the table, what kept you at the table, and the different ways you engage with philanthropy and giving. So there's some questions coming through for both of you, actually, and we'll come back to that. But I suppose, you know, it's really interesting for me, who, as Mike said, I've been on the other side of the table for many years. And when you are, and some of the issues I was involved with, and Phil alluded to them, when you're involved with fighting for marriage equality or women's equality or children's rights, poverty, access to justice, all the things that I've been involved with, it is so encouraging when you know that there are people like you in the background supporting those causes in whatever way, and the difference that makes. So thank you for your very powerful contribution, and thank you for all that you do. You know, Phil, and I mean, look, everybody alludes to the fact that there are huge challenges ahead for us. And there is the immediacy of the COVID-19. It's moving from an emergency to a longer term impact. Look, there's no need for me to talk about that. Climate justice and climate action is something that's incredibly urgent for us. The health and well-being of our people. All of these are areas that philanthropy, gift giving and legacies will have an incredible impact going forward. And so we're really delighted to be having this morning, and that we have so many people that are interested. As Mike said earlier, some of you are with us and have a relationship with the Foundation for many years, and others are newer to the conversation and to us. So I hope the former will indulge me while I put into context a little bit about the Foundation, but also, I suppose, for everybody, just a little bit of information about what we've been trying to do over the last while. So people will be aware we're 20 years in the making. My predecessor, Tina Roach, her vision resulted in over 60 million being given out to communities across Ireland. You know, I mentioned some of the issues that I personally worked on, and where myself and fellow campaigners knew that quietly in the background there was the support and backing of donors of the Community Foundation for Ireland, and the difference that that made to our work. Some of the key social issues in Ireland have been supported by the Community Foundation for Ireland and their donors, you know, coming in at key moments where they were able to offer time, money, expertise that made a huge difference. And marriage equality was just one of those. As I said, the arrival of COVID-19 in late February, it's changed everything, and it's changed our lives in a way that we, you know, will be measuring for a long time. But I think it's also changed philanthropy. It's also changed, I think, the giving context for philanthropy. And again, Phil, you really alluded to that. And, you know, the survey that was done in the States, a similar survey here, has resulted in similar outcomes. There is no doubt that inequalities have been amplified, and those that are most vulnerable are most affected. Charity and community groups are telling us, just like your slide, that the demand for their services have increased, their methods of delivery have changed, and yet their revenue models have been wiped out overnight. So it is absolutely crucial, and some of them don't know whether they'll survive more than 6 months. So it is incredible, and I suppose that financial insecurity because of the pandemic has really put pressure on a sector that is so needed in so many ways across the country. And so philanthropy now can make a difference in a way that it's always done, but really can do it now in a way that is just unprecedented. I suppose for us at the Community Foundation, I'll talk about 2 interventions, and that tells you a little bit more about us, I think. You know, when the pandemic first hit, the team at CFI were really quickly off the mark, and they were ready, and it is a really agile and flexible foundation, so it was really recognise that need for rapid action straight away. With the donors, it developed an emergency fund, just under 3 million, and established to really address those needs. Some of those needs, Phil, that you highlighted in your presentation that are absolutely echoed here. You know, the urgent needs of, and also in the video early on, I think it really articulated some of the, where some of the monies went. But older people, food poverty, domestic violence, mental health, young people, you know, all the services that are out there that are providing a lifeline to those different communities. They were telling us that they needed help and they needed it fast. So we were able to do that in terms of the emergency fund, and it was incredible the way our donors who are listening now came and supported us in that. The second, I suppose, intervention in relation to the pandemic and this context was Ortida's Comic Relief, and that was the brainchild of Deirdre O'Kane and Darren Smith, and it was an incredible partnership. We had 1.4 million viewers. In American terms, that's not much, but in an Irish context, that's pretty good. And with government and our corporate partners and our donors, again, we raised 6 million for communities, which is incredible. And now, as I speak, the team are going through the applications. The closing date is the end of September, and we'll be then be giving out grants across the country from 1,000 to 100,000. So I suppose in conclusion, we are a foundation that's able to do that. We're able to be flexible, we're able to be agile, and it's been incredible, the generosity of our donors. So as we go towards the end of 2020, we'll give out about 15 million, which is nearly double what we did last year. And I think a lot of the conversations like this, but conversation generally, and Comic Relief played a role in that, but just the way people have come forward and talked about the possible role of donors and the larger gifts as well as the smaller gifts, the importance in supporting communities. And I think that if we enhance that awareness, we will be able to, as a foundation, really continue to play a strong role in our society with our donors, but particularly in the recovery and what that might look like. I mentioned the role of Ortida's Comic Relief, but the partnership with government in that, as well as our donors, bringing all those players to the table to raise 6 million in just such a short period of time. I think it shows the willingness of government, although we've a way to go, but in partnering with philanthropy. And certainly for us as a foundation, that's now what we will be really continuing to do, is pushing government to see philanthropy as a partner and to see that donors can do things in a way that maybe state institutions or public sector are slower in being able to do, but that the partnership approach can really work. One example again is Climate Action Fund. The Green Party announced and the government announced 500 million for an Action Climate Fund. And so again, Community Foundation, we're quick off the mark. We're out there saying you have to give 5 million of this to communities. If you don't get the communities on board in terms of public awareness, in public engagement, the rest won't happen. We're asking for €1 per citizen, back to your making every euro counts, €1 per citizen for 3 years. And we're still in negotiation around that. But again, I suppose we're trying to say to government, look, in lots of areas, children, people with disability, older people, we're on the ground, we're working with all those organisations. We should be partnering with philanthropy to make sure that there is a bigger pot there. And so that's one of the things that we'll be doing, continuing to do going forward. The great thing about being new into an organisation is you get to say whatever you like about the organisation and how you've observed them over the years, and in the new role as CEO. And for me, the Community Foundation for Ireland has such a strong record of being an excellent centre for philanthropy. It's incredible the work that it does, and it is well positioned to continue and grow philanthropy in Ireland. For me, there's a couple of things it does extremely well, and I hope you'll bear with me as I share them. I think the first thing that it does that really guides donors in how their support can make a difference. What we've been alluding to this morning, and it really support donors in delivering the outcomes. And I think you're right, Stephen, in them deciding what they believe the problem is and the outcomes for them are, and then partnering with recipients to see how they match and marry together. And that's something that we really do very well. We're really alert, as I say, to the emerging issues. You know, again, Phil talked about the racial inequality conversation across America, but I suppose there are so many conversations like that, and we like to be at the cutting edge of those and making sure that our donors are aware of them. And over the next few months, we will be having conversations that donors can tap into what the recipients are saying, what the organizations are saying, and just, I suppose, behind the scenes, cutting edge, and what are the solutions? What can we do together to really change some of the issues that are out there, whether they're emergent or whether they're longer term systematic change. And so for us, constant engagement with the front line and those that are providing the services, as well as those who are recipients, is core value of the Community Foundation for Ireland. And it's something that we do really well. Also, the organisation, the due diligence and governance. So taking that out of it again, I think, Stephen, you mentioned that, you know, having a foundation that can really mind that for you. It is a minefield at the moment. It becomes more complicated. Community Foundation do that so well. And then they try and do the best that they can with every dollar you give us. That being the theme of this morning. So I suppose in conclusion, you know, you're invited here this morning as speakers or as existing donors or organisations that are waiting or thinking about playing a greater role, particularly in supporting vulnerable and strengthening our communities, which is what we are at the heart of. I've attempted to cover how it is a time when philanthropy in this country is playing a greater role. It can play an even better role. A time where we hope as a foundation to play a role in getting that role acknowledged and recognised, creating conditions that will encourage even more. And where philanthropy will be, I suppose, really looking at the gap that's been caused by the pandemic and the general fall in donations, and where fundraising has largely been halted. We will continue to provide communities with support and the funding that they need with our donors for the whole range of social issues, justice, equality issues, and I suppose, again, being ready to help where the most vulnerable are saying that the need is. I'm going to close now and I'm going to conclude, and I suppose just to touch quickly again on the vision and purpose of Community Foundation for Ireland. We connect the generosity of donors with the energy, ideas and efforts of people in the community. We really aim to particularly help individuals, families, companies and charitable groups who want to establish their donor advice funds to better manage their philanthropic efforts and invest wisely in the causes that really make a difference. And again, Stephen, you alluded to that, where you said you really thought through what the problem is for you, where you want to help, what would it look like, and then you brought family and friends in as well. And that's what we really like to encourage at the Community Foundation of Ireland. So if you've been inspired by what you've heard and you'd like to talk to us about your giving, if you're just starting to think about it, anywhere you are in the journey, please let us know. And many of you will know Jackie Harrison, our Director of Philanthropy, and so get in touch with myself or Jackie. We're just going to provide another video now to give you another flavour of some of the impact of your giving, for those of you that have. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers for our speakers. Thank you.
Many families were really struggling to keep food on the table, and they were running out of money. We knew that the Department of Education was going to continue with the school meals programme for primary and second level, but we were very worried for families where a child might get a meal in their early year site or in their creche, and for families that weren't in contact with services, because the impact on children of hunger, it means that they're very unhappy, it affects their emotional development, they feel very unloved, and affects their growth and their well-being. The Community Foundation, with the support of the Bank of Ireland, was able to very quickly give us a grant, and with the support of Children and Youth Services Committee, we were able to run a scheme, and within a month we had 22 projects from nearly every county in Ireland, with volunteers helping to deliver hot meals to families and food parcels and nappies. Yeah, in terms of impact, we were able to reach over 1,000 vulnerable families, and nearly 2,000 children got to benefit. What we were hearing from organisations was a lot of these families had experienced food poverty for the first time in their lives. One particular family told us a story. They weren't in receipt of the COVID payment or welfare payments, but they soon ran out of money. They very quickly got into debt. And when they saw the scheme advertised, they were ashamed to seek help to feed their children. But the project was very clear that the parcels would be confidential. And when the bag of potatoes, when the box of vegetables, and when the meat arrived, the mother told us she fell on her knees and cried, because one of the most difficult things for parents to have to deal with is their failure to feed their children. And what this project enables us to do, to get to the parents and the children that needed it most. Philanthropy for us has played a critical role in our national campaigns over the last 25 years. When key opportunities have come up for us, philanthropists have stood in and helped us. So in the Irish Times, for example, and Fintan O'Toole contacted us at the end of 2018 and said, look, we want to run a national initiative, can we run it with you? To really get a national conversation going on the impact of poverty on children, and let's try and get some key wins over the line. We were able to call on the Community Foundation and the Tomer Trust to step in and provide us with, campaign officers, a campaign budget, so we could really make the most of a national, once-in-a-lifetime campaign with the Irish Times. And again, what you find is philanthropy from the Community Foundation continues to step forward when there's very pressing social needs for children and young people. What you found was they had huge engagement rates online with their stories. They gave us a chance to profile the work of our member organisations like SVP and Bernardo's and Cross Care that are working with very vulnerable families throughout the country, and actually helped us convince politicians of the need to invest more in addressing poverty. All of that made a real difference to people living in poverty in Ireland, and we couldn't have done that without the Irish Times, and we couldn't have done that without the Community Foundation. I think philanthropy is different because sometimes unique opportunities come up where you can make a real impact for children and young people. And philanthropists time and again have stepped in to turn the tide. So for refugee children, for undocumented children, for children experiencing poverty, traveller children. I also think philanthropists are critical for organisations that really need to stay independent of government, particularly when they're running national advocacy campaigns. We have an annual report card, and it assesses whether the government is delivering on its promises in the programme for government. And the truth is, no government is going to want to fund a report card on itself. I want to say thank you for believing in our work and stepping in and really allowing the Children's Rights Alliance to run national campaigns that have really made a huge difference for children when it comes to education, to healthcare, social welfare. The truth is, a lot of the campaign initiatives that we run simply wouldn't have happened without their belief and their commitment in our work.
Okay, we've got a bit of time now for questions and answers, and a few come in. Mike, I'm going to ask you to join the panel for the Q&A. Is that okay? Do you mind me? Yeah, I won't throw anything at you that you're not expecting, I promise. Yeah. So there's been a couple of things. I'm going to start with, and I'm going to ask each of you. I'll start with you, Phil, but people have asked what are the best examples of philanthropic giving in your view. We've seen, you alluded to marriage equality. Tanya obviously there has talked about the No Child campaign. So starting with you, Phil, what are some examples? You gave some already, but just give one example. Then I'm going to go to Stephen, and then I'm going to go to Mike.
There, only one. I mean, I think that what we don't realize is that like effective philanthropy touches so many different aspects of society and things in our life that we take for granted. So literally from things like, not worrying about our kids getting yellow fever because the Rockefeller Foundation supported the work that led to the development of the vaccine, to the community organizations that we take for granted, that we take our kids to, whether it's the Children's Museum or the Art Museum. So and everything in between. But I think marriage equality is a great example, both in Ireland and the United States. And then I think an issue here that I would point to where there's still a ton of work to be done, but a rare example of philanthropists coming together across the ideological spectrum and really making a difference is to do something about our criminal justice system, and particularly the unbelievable racial disparities in criminal justice here. And there has been some progress, and there needs to be much more.
Great, thanks. Stephen?
Well, I mean, I think you have to stand in awe of the great philanthropists of our time. And I mean, you'd have to include, obviously, Bill Gates and his vision of trying to do major long-term things in the area of medical research and the obliteration of disease and so forth. And I suppose the other one is Chuck Feeney, who just basically blew the lot. Fantastic, absolutely unbelievable contributions, not just to Ireland. I mean, he gave an awful lot to Ireland, but other things too. So yeah, I mean, some of these really big philanthropists, I think you have to stand in awe. And most of those do have, a philosophy behind this. They thought it through. They're not really just in the random giving category, although they're doing that as well.
Great, thanks. Mike, you've been chair now of the Huge Foundation for a while. Have you anything that particularly comes to mind of really strategic giving, or any type of giving that had resonance for you?
Sure, Denise. Yeah, here's a good one that the Community Foundation for Ireland, has a kind of a following of donors, people who they can ring around, and Tina and Jackie, and I know you've already got into it, Denise. Every so often, if something comes up that looks like a good idea, they'd ring around and kind of say, "Do you want in?" And it's usually something very strategic, long-term, and it's often not very glamorous, because it's often some cause that doesn't resonate easily, and therefore, there's a particular masochistic attraction to trying to take it on, because it's neither easy nor easy to explain. So a good example of that was an organisation called Safe Ireland, which the Community Foundation for Ireland and its merry band of donors has been supporting for a while, and now that's an organisation to tackle the tricky question, the very tricky question of domestic abuse. But the particular plan, or the particular strategic thing, was actually a very unglamorous aspect, which is just actually to help political lobbying and things like even talking to the police, talking to the Department of Justice, setting up education courses for judges and solicitors and things like that. So really nitty-gritty stuff, again, which wouldn't have an immediate impact, but years later, that's all beginning to bear fruit. And it's only recently, I heard that as a direct result of that, the performance of the Irish police and indeed our Department of Justice, etc., has been fantastic in tackling the particular challenges of domestic abuse in the pandemic situation. And again, that's not subjective. When you compare the statistics, apparently we compare much better with the UK, which should be reasonably comparable, or other countries. So it's a great success story. Far too difficult to explain that it'll make easy newspaper headlines. It's been long-term and strategic, and I think it's a great example.
Yeah, great. Thanks a million. Bill, I have another question for you, and I see Stephen and yourself may have a varying view on this, so I'll go back to you as well, Stephen. But ShareGift I just put a question around unrestricted funding. Why do you think that people are resistant to it?
Lack of trust. in organizations, I think, is a big part of it. I think another part is this sense that, I want to know exactly how my money is being used, which is rational, but can get in the way actually of effectiveness, right? Because I would say, I'm not like an absolutist on this. There's a time for project support. I mean, if you want to see a particular thing happen at a university, you might want to fund that particular thing and not give unrestricted money to the university. That makes total sense. But when an organization's goals largely overlap with your own goals as a philanthropist, then the most effective thing you can do is give that organization the unrestricted resources that it needs to be able to develop its capacity, do what it needs to do given the changing context. And I think sometimes that is not done, as I said at the beginning, because of a lack of trust. And then I would argue, if you don't have that trust in the nonprofit, you shouldn't be supporting them in the first place. So if you trust an organization enough to support them, their goals overlap with yours, then trust the leadership to figure out how to use the resources to pursue those goals.
Great, thanks. Stephen, a different perspective?
Well, I agree that if you have complete trust in the organizations, then yeah, you could give them unrestricted funds. The problem is, I think it has to be acknowledged that there is a lack of trust, particularly in some of these larger organizations. Some of them become political. Some of them I remember driving through Uganda a few years ago, and I mean, the only vehicles of any quality on the road were huge Toyota Land Cruisers with the names of all the charities written on them, brand new ones. And this does undermine trust, I think, in some of these larger charities. The political issues around the national trust in the UK is a very good example at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And just then bringing that back to an Irish context, Mike, what would your view? Phil was talking earlier, I suppose, about the value of the community and voluntary sector, and again, you've seen it here in this context. Any view on that?
Yeah, and Phil referred to this as well. The whole thing about the idealist or the ideal view of a government. It's certainly true. If the government could and would do everything, then you wouldn't need philanthropy. But obviously, that's impossible. That's utopian. But you do get this, and indeed you do find in dealing with civil servants that would be often a view that, well, the government should be doing this. Why should we cede control of this if one wanted to look at that way to somebody else? And indeed, I can sympathise a little bit with that too, because if you're trying to do something, sometimes you don't want somebody coming in and stepping on your toes or doing something different or having a different point of view. But philanthropy brings flexibility, energy, on creativity and resources that the government just doesn't have, or couldn't deploy in the same way as flexible people who aren't spending public money can do. So huge cooperation possible where neither side has to step on each other's toes. They can often cooperate. They can often just do their different thing, but there's got to be a huge role for both side by side, and therefore, our view is obviously that philanthropy should be encouraged as a public policy to the greatest extent possible.
Great, thanks. There's a comment then about Chuck Feeney, who has been mentioned, the great Chuck Feeney, and that is there. Do the panelists think there is a move towards more increased giving by living, and encouraging, I suppose, that type of philanthropy? And then the second part of the question is the next generations. How do we bring them to the table? If you are leaving them something, how can you bring them to the table? I'm going to start with Stephen, and then I'll go to Michael, and then I'll go to Phil.
Well, it's a crucial issue, of course, because they are the future. And we're seeing an awful lot of young people make big fortunes now in IT and things like that. And, they'll have to step up like everybody else. I suppose one of the things that I think about in Dublin is the contribution of the new industries that we have here that are in many cases here for tax reasons, and they're doing very well by being here. And I think some of their philanthropy, as I understand it, is educational, but educational in their own universe. And I think they could do more, to be quite honest, for the universities and for the, generally for the arts and the universities. That's my thought on that.
Great, thank you very much. Mike?
Yeah, I must admit, I haven't done a study on this, so it's only my experience, but I've actually found that the younger people who have, if you meet young people who have been good or fortunate enough to make a lot of money, they're actually, on average, I find, more inclined to give it away while living. They're less inclined. Maybe it's because, particularly in Ireland, because we're developing and we're getting more accustomed to money. I would think just naturally, in my experience, that younger people are better attuned to this. When I say younger, by the way, it could be 40, as opposed to 20. The other comment I can't resist mentioning, which always influenced me, is that I remember, these calendars where you tear off one page at a time for the day, and there was one of them that had a quote for each day, and one of them was George Bernard Shaw, but I could never track this down on the internet. But the quote was great. If he did say it, he said, somebody who leaves their money to charity in their will should not be described as generous, because at that stage they're giving away somebody else's money.
That's the second quote of the day from George Bernard Shaw.
Back to George Bernard Shaw. Yeah.
Very good, thanks. So Phil, next generation, how do we bring them to the table? How do we keep them at the table? What's their interests? Any views?
Well, I mean, I agree with what Stephen and Michael have said about the importance of encouraging young people. I think young people are impatient to make a difference early in their lives, and that the sort of old paradigm of learn, earn, serve, it doesn't really apply anymore. People don't want to live their life that way. And I think there's some research that suggests that's true. And then on the giving while living thing, I mean, I do think there are some prominent examples of that, when young donors saying, no, I'm going to give it away in my lifetime. And my own view is like that perpetual foundations, for example, can play an important role. I mean, I'm glad that the Rockefeller Foundation, has a history in working on issues like disease and vaccines, and, they're working on testing right now. Like, I'm glad that they have that history. But I also think, now is a time for unprecedented levels of giving because of the need. And my own view is like that donors should not necessarily default one way or the other. You should look at the issue and the context. So like, for example, I don't really understand how, if you think climate change, is an imminent threat to our ability to inhabit the planet, you would then establish a foundation to exist in perpetuity and only pay 5% a year to focus on climate change, in a future that is imperiled. So I think you just have to think it through, to Stephen's point, rationally, given the problem, what kind of spending makes sense. Is it short-term, medium-term, long-term?
Thank you. Another question is around, I suppose, the type of philanthropy. Money is very important, but what else is important? Time, expertise. Stephen, you gave us a really fantastic example of, if you have involvement, you keep your involvement and you grow it, and you gave money, time, expertise, went on the board, brought family and friends with you, that all-round package. Just to comment, or maybe just to elaborate on that a bit more, why you felt that was important, and just generally in terms of philanthropy.
Well, it's partly a selfish thing. I mean, what do you do these days when you begin to scale back your activities in business, but you don't want to retire? I mean, I'm 70 and I've no intention of retiring, but equally I've no intention of going back to the kind of high profile business role that I had in the past. So what do you actually do? And it pays you back hugely. You make new friends. It gives you some reason for getting up in the morning and going on webinars like this. It's a very good thing from a way of life point of view, quite frankly. Now, that's just me. I mean, I like the involvement, and I'm constantly looking for something to do.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much, Mike. Any views on the type of philanthropy in addition to the hard cash?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just determined by circumstances, because some people have loads of energy, and they can make time if they don't have it. Some people have resources or money, and the third element is some people have ideas. I have to admit, for myself, I'm terribly short of the third one, so I tend to try and lean on people who have the first and the second. And I'd say a lot of that is determined by circumstance. So sometimes the people with ideas, they just happen to have been in a position where a relative had some problem, and that's got them into the tackling that problem. Some people are just naturally very good with ideas. Others, as I said, are willing to give generously. Others, like a lot of us, as Stephen said, just want to be useful. And it depends on where your cards have fallen, I think, and that's your starting point.
Thanks, Mike. There's another question about, is the Community Foundation for Ireland working on a better environment for tax relief on larger gifts? So I'll answer that if I may. So we are working with government at the moment. We have our sights on the finance bill for some changes. I don't think we'll get them this time round. Who knows? We're working very hard at that. And it's something that Tina, my predecessor, was working also on. Our view at the Community Foundation is that we have to open the conversation, have a more active and vibrant conversation about philanthropy, what it does, why it's important, why it's so important in the recovery. We have to open the invitation as well. We have to, Jackie Harrison in the organisation calls it democratise philanthropy. We have to invite people into the table, whether it's a large gift or, Phil, you were saying smaller gifts. It can be scalability, it can be community, it can be various different ways that people can come on board. And I think when we do that, it'll be much more recognised about what philanthropy can do and why it's so important. And I think then we will bring government with us. Any of the big systems change in Ireland, government has always been a little bit behind the people. And I think this might be no exception. But my sense is, and we've been meeting the various different ministers, there is a great openness. I think the partnership with Community Foundation or with Orchida's Comic Relief showed that, and other partnerships we have. So it's really our job to grow awareness of, it's a long answer for a short question, but it's our job to grow awareness of philanthropy, really demonstrate how it works in partnership with the community and voluntary sector and the amazing things that it does. And then I believe that the conditions for more favourable philanthropy will come, but that may be in time. Stephen, I'm going to go back to you, and then I'm going to go to Mike and Phil. You said, and understandably so, that you have to analyse what you want to do. You have to analyse where you want to give. You have to analyse, what the outcome should be. How do you do that? How did you do that?
Thinking about it, essentially, I mean, I haven't done technical sort of due diligence on the programs. I suppose most of the things I've been involved in, I've stayed with for a while. So, in Nepal, for example, it took several years of watching the schools be built from bamboo, and these children actually being educated and so forth, visiting regularly, listening to some of the lessons, to see what the standard was. You go into a room made of bamboo with no lighting, and it's packed with children all studying Boyle's Law or Shakespeare. I mean, the standard of education is good, but I mean, the poverty is just horrendous. So I watched it over time. And I suppose it's the same. You gradually get involved with other organizations, with the Academy of Music, start with sponsoring a small little thing like a violin prize, and then getting more involved, and then moving on to try and help them organize the construction of a new conservatoire. So I think one of the things I said was that the benefits of an ongoing involvement. And I think and then you can come up with ideas, as Mike just said. So, for example, I dreamed up the idea of an international poetry prize at Trinity, and they were delighted with it because they never had one at all, and it's in its third year. It's going great.
Great, thank you very much. There's a question: how do we get people to talk more about philanthropy? I suppose back to my having this vibrant conversation. Everybody very appreciative of Stephen doing that, and Mike and different people, but how do we encourage, Mike, how do we encourage people to come to the table, but to tell people about why they're there and how they're there?
Yeah, that's a really hard one, Denise. I wish I knew an easy answer. one way is obviously you've people like Stephen, you've people who can be role models, who are prepared to, to talk and educate people. I'm guessing this is something Phil will probably confirm. I guess this is something probably unique to the Irish culture, is that, people don't like talking about themselves. Whether it's an element of they want their privacy, or they're afraid people will say things about them, whatever. I think that's more extreme.
We don't have that problem here.
Yeah. So the best I can think of, Denise, is webinars like this are great. Our Philanthropist of the Year awards. There are some people who will, who not alone do the good things, that then are prepared to explain to others how they did them. It's great, and just the more people we can have that are willing to break cover, as it were, the better it is.
There is a natural reluctance. I have to say, I've been dragged here rather than volunteered to.
Volunteers, really very good.
But I think in a lot of cases, you prefer to keep your head down, really.
Yeah. We're drawing to an end. We've 4 to 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask you just one final question, and then I'll hand over to Mike, maybe to say thank you. So how do we sustain the giving that has been a reaction to this emergency? How do we sustain that in the longer term? Bill, you might have some advice for us, or some lessons from the US.
I don't know that I have anything on this more than just a personal opinion, which is by doing more than is comfortable, by pushing yourself to actually give at a level that requires some sacrifice, because it's that important, and the opportunity to make a difference is that great. I've been reading the newspapers here, and I come across articles about, a recent article in the New York Times about the challenge that wealthy folks were having getting adjusted to having to live full time in their second home during quarantine. This is written as if this is like a real challenge, right? And can we ask folks for whom that is their greatest challenge right now to think about, how they might contribute to folks like the people we saw, in your opening video, whose challenges are at a whole nother level, and just ask folks to do all they can.
Great, thanks, Phil. Stephen?
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think in America, the whole concept of philanthropy is so far advanced of probably anywhere else. It's an inherent endemic part of the culture. I think it is now just beginning to get like that here. We've seen a great lead from certain high-profile individuals, J.P. McManus's contributions to Limerick, and so on. And I think that's what we need to encourage, is the idea that philanthropy needs to become an absolutely embedded part of the national narrative.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for that. I'm going to give the last word to Mike. Just for those of you whose questions weren't answered, and there were one or two, please get in touch, and we'd be delighted to continue the conversation with you. And obviously we'll be following up with everybody. So Mike, over to you. Final word.
Thank you, Denise. Well, just very quickly, huge thanks to Stephen and Phil for their expertise on the ground, and not just academic. These guys clearly know what they're talking about. Thank you, Denise, for a very good explanation of what's been going on in the Community Foundation for Ireland, and delighted to have you on board again. And lastly, and most importantly, thanks to everybody who's tuned into us here. And I think that the message I leave you with is that we're starting by assuming that somebody is interested and wants to get involved. So we're not just fundraising. And I think the biggest thing we would ask of everybody here is to spread the word more than anything else. So we need name recognition. We want the Community Foundation to be known, what we do, how we can help both donors as well as grantees. And as Tina used to say, we're at the foothills. We've a long way to go, and we're looking forward to getting there. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.